Welcome to Edie Extra, edie.net's home for all of our exclusive special audio features. As more voices, businesses and initiatives join the conversation on environmental sustainability and tackling the climate crisis, Edie Extra cuts through the noise. We'll be asking the big questions about the hot topics, profiling seasoned leaders, and getting out and about, taking you to the heart of the action with on-site recordings from site visits and events across the world. Welcome to the place to find in-depth conversations with sustainability leaders about sustainability leadership. Welcome to Edie Extra.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Edie Extra. I'm Edie's editor Matt Mace and it's a pleasure to be back discussing transition plans for this episode. Over the past few months, we've delivered in-depth interviews with the likes of Inca Group, BT, Clarion Housing and the BBC to uncover what is included in their transition plans and how they were created. And I'm pleased to say we're back with more insight on what it takes to deliver such plans, this time with energy giant OVO. OVO's new Mind the Green Gap plan details how it intends to meet its 2035 net zero target, which covers its operations and supply chain, as well as the energy products and services it supplies to customers. It states that the business intends to meet this lofty goal in a way which contributes to the wider transition to a low-carbon economy, respects and enables nature to flourish, and ensures a just transition that benefits everyone. Scope 3 emissions account for more than 99% of OVO's total climate footprint. Around 2/3 of that footprint is attributable to gas sold to customers. The remainder is largely attributable to electricity sold to customers as well. And OVO to date has recorded a 36% reduction in emissions from gas sold since 2018, but this was largely down to customers using less gas amidst the energy cost crisis and the cost of living crisis. The transition plan states that this is not a sustainable solution economically or for the people, and the company is therefore calling on the government to implement policies which would enable more households and businesses to switch from gas to electric cooking and heating. So this plan is a bit of a twofold one. Not only does it explore what OVO is able to do with its own operations and supply chain, but does touch on that key part of all transitions, the remit that's outside of their direct control and the advocacy that will be needed to ensure that OVO can reach net zero. And I'm delighted to say that to learn more about this plan and what it will take to deliver it, I am joined by OVO's Senior Sustainability Manager, Kim van Lieshout. So Kim, thank you so much for welcoming me to your offices today to discuss your transition plan.
Thanks so much for having me.
So we obviously covered the plan on EDIE as it's announced, and I, having spoken to quite a lot of other organisations about their own plans, I know how much work goes into it, but what's the reception been like since publishing the document? I suppose it's been a bit of relief, but also probably a lot of interest, right?
Yeah, it definitely was a relief to get it out the door. And it was really exciting to launch it at London Climate Action Week. And the reception since launching the plan has been generally very positive. I think the intent that we had with launching the paper was that we didn't want it to just be a PDF that sat on a corporate website. We really wanted it to be something that stimulated discussion in the market and with our peers, and I think doing the launch event at London Climate Action Week really helped with that, because we came up with kind of an immersive experience that helped bring some of the topics that we discuss in the plan to life. So we created this theme called Destination Electric, where people were able to visit the different stations on their journey to net zero and understand some of the challenges that they're facing when opting for some of those technologies. So whether that's a product challenge, a policy challenge, or a perception challenge, it was really good to kind of like bring that into an immersive experience space. So I think the market responded really positively to that. Internally as well, we've seen a really great reception from our people here at OVO. So we've been touring that experience across our offices, and that's been really helping to bring some like tangibility for everyone's roles at OVO to the principles that we talk about in the plan. And then we've also had a great reception from our peers in the market. So we've had other energy retailers reach out, congratulate us for the efforts of getting a plan out the door, but also talk about opportunities for collaboration on some of the topics that we discussed within the plan. So yeah, it's been positive.
And you mentioned the internal reception to it, but in terms of developing this, going all the way back to the inception point, I'd be really interested to hear about how that journey take place. How long did it take? Who did you have to get involved? How did you explain what a climate transition plan is? Because there's a lot of unknowns in a climate transition plan. So how did that internal conversation shape up?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think at OVO we're really lucky because we launched Plan Zero, which was our original response to the climate crisis back in 2019. So we've had almost 6 years of really baking in a sustainable mindset into the business. So that was a really good foundation to work against. So we set our first net zero target in 2019. We've since refreshed some of our targets that sit beneath that. So a lot of our products and services across the business have been geared towards decarbonisation for quite some time anyway. But one, I guess, the gap that we've seen in our sustainability work has been around understanding the key dependencies across the market that we're reliant on for mass market decarbonisation. And I think that responding to the recommendations of the Transition Plan Task Force was a natural next step for us in addressing that gap. So that really moved us from having a target, of understanding generally what we need to do, to having a really clear plan for the next 3 years on what we want to prioritise and focus on. So that's been really helpful. In terms of the process itself, I would say from start to finish it probably took about 6 months, from pulling together all the kind of green threads across the business that feed into our decarbonisation pathway, to writing the plan, to designing the plan, and ultimately launching it at London Climate Action Week. But it was definitely a collaborative process. So in terms of how we pulled together the contents of the plan, we started with our carbon footprint. So we are one of the largest energy retailers in the UK. We sell electricity and gas to around 4 million customers. And with that, we have a pretty sizable carbon footprint. So we're actually responsible for around 3% of the UK's total emissions. We have a carbon footprint of almost 10 million tonnes. So for us, we started to segment that emissions profile into electricity sold, gas sold, and also our supplier base, and then start talking to the teams across the business that can enable that decarbonisation. So our energy trading team, our renewables team, our commercials teams who focus on the products and services that we get out the door, and I guess most importantly our policy teams, so to understand like what policy priorities we need to focus on over the next couple of years to enable that mass market decarbonisation for all. So definitely a lengthy collaborative process, and that probably was the bulk of the work for us. And then I was very fortunate to have a very kind team that let me carve out 2 weeks of uninterrupted time out of my diary to just sit and actually write the thing. So that was really helpful as well. And then passed it on to our creative studio, who again, we have great in-house capabilities creatively, who then designed it, finessed it, and ultimately got us to the point of being able to publish it, put it out into the world.
So amazing you were able to do that in 6 months, considering all those kind of green threads, as you mentioned, you've had to pull through, but I'm sure it didn't come without its challenges of developing a plan of this scope with the impact that a company like OVO has. So what was the real kind of hurdles that you feel you had to get over to get this plan out there?
Yeah, it's a good question. There were definitely a lot of challenges that we faced in pulling together the plan. I think the biggest one for us was probably a recognition that we are so dependent on like a market shift for our decarbonisation. So selling electricity and selling gas, the way that we account for our electricity carbon footprint is by adopting a location-based methodology. So we reflect the national grid factor, which means that we are reliant on the whole UK's grid decarbonising to reduce that part of our carbon footprint. So with that, obviously we're not a vertically integrated supplier. That's quite difficult for us to directly influence. So it's thinking about how we can use our role as an energy retailer to increase adoption of flexible assets or help customers to understand best times to use electricity over the course of the day, and also think about what policy landscape we want to sculpt to enable that. And that's the same on the gas side of things. So how can we use our influence to enable a mass market adoption of electric heating technologies rather than just focusing on a small subset of customers.
And I want to, I suppose, ask you a question about what kind of, you mentioned the TPT and how that framework's obviously been, it is considered in the UK the kind of gold standard to follow in that sense, but I think transition plans in terms of public facing ones aren't that commonplace yet amongst businesses compared to some other areas of sustainability. And in that sense, you're probably one of the first movers in this space that we've seen and we've covered. So did it feel kind of discomforting to kind of be almost venturing into the unknown a little bit? Was there a temptation to maybe just wait and then learn from some others in the sector once they'd kind of gone out with theirs? Why go so proactively on this?
Yeah, I think there were a lot of good examples that were already out in the market that were really helpful to use as a guide, especially in like the telecom sector. Mm-hmm. So BT, Vodafone especially, kind of using those businesses that are also reliant on like mass infrastructure updates for their decarbonisation as a bit of a guide of what that could look like for us. Also, we started to see some peers start to publish their transition plans as well. So Centrica just published their transition plan. So it was kind of helpful to use those examples as a guide. I would say that whilst it's helpful to use those as a guide of kind of like the structure, the plan needs to be really specific to you and your business. So taking inspiration from those plans is helpful, but ultimately once you start writing it, it becomes so unique and so specific to the challenge that you have as your business. So I think it's good as a sense check, but once you actually start getting through the detail of what you need to do and how you will respond uniquely to the decarbonisation challenge of your business, it kind of just like becomes your own.
Great stuff. And you mentioned the other kind of plans you're able to look at, which is great, and obviously TPT guidance we've touched upon already. Is there any kind of other externalities for anyone listening right now that's maybe working on their own transition plan for their organisation? What other kind of frameworks or guidance did you guys lean on to get this developed?
So the starting point for me was just honestly going through the recommendations of the Transition Plan Task Force and doing a bit of a gap analysis on what information that we had. I think a lot of sustainability teams would be quite surprised at how much information you already have if you've done a couple of rounds of public reporting in the past. So TCFD disclosures, data from SECR disclosures if you've submitted a target to the SBTI, kind of like all the alphabet soup of sustainability reporting. If you've disclosed against a lot of those in the past, it'll be helpful to start populating some of the TPT recommendations. So that's kind of where I started, and that helped me to identify where we did need to build out some of the gaps to fill against them.
One of my favourite things when I read through transition plans is when businesses list what's outside of their real scope of control, the externalities that are reliant on them to be able to hit their targets, because every business has that kind of market forces that need to shape up.
Yeah.
And OVO's obviously in a really unique position, and we know with part of the plan there's a lot of focus on kind of advocating for the government to implement policies that would enable more households and businesses to switch from gas, for example.
Yeah.
In terms of that engagement process, that's probably with the consumers and the public in particular, we're in this interesting time where there is this kind of noisy kind of backlash against net zero a little bit. The energy costs are still very much front and central to people's minds. How have you gone around weaving those kind of considerations into what is essentially OVO setting out its stall to say, well, this is how we're going to reach net zero?
Yeah, it's a really great question, and I guess the public rhetoric on net zero and I guess like the political landscape around that, we definitely have seen a bit of a swing over the last couple of years. However, lots of consumers still really care about the climate crisis and want to do their bit in responding to that. I think especially as we continue to feel the impacts of climate change closer and closer to home, it's still a priority for the majority of customers. And whilst people care, we understand that a lot of consumers can't currently access the steps that they need to take to decarbonise their home energy use. And that's what this plan is really about, is like enabling that access for mass market. And with that, it comes down to it basically being a better technology for customers to opt for. And that better can mean different things to different people. So that sometimes will just be one on the green argument. It's more carbon. It's got a lower carbon footprint to opt for a heat pump rather than a gas boiler. But also we want to win that better argument on things like cost and comfort. And that's where our external dependencies on things like the government's Warm Homes plan to help bring down costs, installation costs and running costs of those technologies is really important. So I think it's just about positioning those choices for consumers as an option that's just generally better for them rather than something that's exclusively greener.
And just to finish then, Kim, the thing that really stuck with me was when you said about how even when following the guidance, the plan becomes your own thing. It's no kind of carbon copy of what's really out there because it's based on your business's kind of materiality and metrics. There'll be a lot of sustainability professionals listening to this conversation right now, trying to just make a start, even whilst following the kind of recommendations. If you had to give one key piece of advice to someone that's building this, regardless of whether they're doing engaging the internal team, whether they're trying to think about actually what are these externalities they rely on, if you had to give one key piece of advice to an organisation developing their transition plan, what would that be?
I think the piece of advice that I would give anyone who's starting out on building out a transition plan would be to keep it simple and also rely on what the work that you've already done. You won't be starting from scratch in a lot of cases, especially, as I said, if you've done a lot of external reporting so far. If you've got a target, you've done a TCFD disclosure, that ambition, that risk management will help you craft the strategy. So use what you already have, perform a gap analysis against the TPT recommendations, and don't overcomplicate it. These plans are meant to be something that helps you focus and prioritise actions in the short to medium term. So just make sure that everything that you are crafting within that plan is achievable, time-bound, specific, and just keep it as simple as possible, I think.
Great stuff. And in the short term then for OVO now, what's going to be the kind of focus area? You mentioned kind of 6 months of your time dedicated to getting this plan ready. What's the kind of next steps for you?
So I think the next steps for us are all around electrification of heat. So we anticipate that the government will be bringing out their warm homes plan in October time, so next month. And that will open up a period of opportunity for us to engage with the government on all things electrification of heat. So bringing our thinking around getting the cost down to install these technologies, making them appropriate for the most amount of homes as possible. Watch this space. We'll be bringing out much more on that in the future.
Great stuff. Well, my colleague Josh informed me today that it's a boiler broke, so he'll be very happy
Nice.
to hear that instance. But Kim, thank you so much for your time. It was great to kind of get under the hood of this transition plan.
Nice, thank you.
And we'll be back with more exclusive ED Extra content over the coming weeks. Be sure to check out other ED Extra episodes available on iTunes, Spotify and all other audio channels. If you aren't already aware, our long-standing Sustainability Uncovered podcast series continues to run each month. So you can head over to edie.net and search Sustainability Uncovered or ED Extra, or see the podcast drop down to access all of our episodes, not just on climate transition plans, but on all of our Green Room interviews and Sustainability Uncovered sessions as well. So until next time, thank you and goodbye.